Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us on this Wednesday night. We're really excited to have one of our conference workshop speakers with us tonight, Lori Ure, and she is a certified bioenergetic therapist, and we are going to go right in to the webinar tonight. On the side, there are two handouts that you can download. If you cannot get them, email me and I will send them to you. And Lori, I'm just going to let you take it away.
Okay, thanks Linda, and welcome everybody who's here so far. I'm going to start by saying some words, and as I say these words, pay attention to what you feel in your body and what happens in your mind. Sex, sexuality, penis, orgasm, vagina, clitoris, testicles, intercourse. So normally when I'm doing a presentation, I like to be very interactive with the audience and see what people say in response to something that I've said. And in this medium, it's a different mode. So I have to kind of guess who's out there and guess at what you might have thought as I said those words, and tell you a little bit about, for me, speaking those words causes a little bit of contraction in my body, and I noticed that culturally I think that talking about sexuality is still a little taboo, and it's something that we're not really supposed to talk about or think about, or, you know, people have it on their minds, but it's not something we're supposed to have out in the open. So this is an opportunity for us to have it out in the open more and to explore this topic a bit. So I also want to encourage you, along the lines of being together to talk about it, to come to the workshop in Providence at the conference there. And the USABP did not pay me to say this, but there we can talk together and it can be a conversation among us rather than me just talking at you. But here we are in this medium, and it's great that I can share with you some of my ideas. First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and here's a picture of me in my office in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where I am right now. And I am a certified bioenergetic therapist and a licensed independent clinical social worker. And I got into bioenergetic therapy about 30 years ago when I had moved to Boston and was looking for a therapist. And I had done some work previously with a body-oriented therapist and knew that that was a good medium for me. So I was looking for another kind of body-oriented therapy and wasn't exactly sure what. And I had volunteered at a place called Interface, which was a holistic organization that had classes and workshops, and just happened to go to a workshop on bioenergetics, and I immediately took to it and found myself a bioenergetic therapist and got into the bioenergetic training program, and it has become my life work. And I consider it one of the greatest blessings of my life to be involved in bioenergetics. So I'm going to try this little dinging thing to ask Linda to move us to the next slide, rather than just saying next slide, because I think that's boring. You there, Linda? Linda!
I am.
Oh, there she is. Okay, great.
I've moved the slide, and I hear the ding, and I will mute myself for the most of it. And if anybody has questions, please write them in the right-hand side, so that if Lori wants to find out something, I can relay those messages back.
Perfect. That way we can have a little bit of a conversation going on. So I want to start by defining sexuality from a bioenergetic viewpoint. And for me, you'll see the flower on this slide, which is an orchid in my house that has just barely come into full bloom. And if any of you have ever grown orchids, you know that they're not necessarily the easiest plants to get to bloom. And for me, sexuality goes along with the metaphor of a flower. A plant can be healthy and doing all right but not blooming. And likewise, a person can be doing all right in their life but not fully having their sexuality and not having as much pleasure and joy in their life as they could be having. And part of my work, I see, is to move them towards blooming and to see what conditions does this person need in order to bloom, because like flowers, different people need different conditions in order to come into that blossoming. And those conditions change over time sometimes. But my question then, moment to moment and person to person, is how can I help this being come into more of their flowering, more of their blossoming, more of their sexuality? And bioenergetically, again, we're talking about a feeling in the body, not what a person looks like, although it can partially be what a person looks like. And we're talking about a whole body experience of energy going through the body and a charge in the genitals and a preparedness for sex. So also we're talking about orgasm reflex, which is an ability to build charge in the body and an ability to surrender into the pleasure of that release. And again, it's a whole body experience. We're not talking just about being able to ejaculate or just be able to release sexually, but be able to have that wave of pleasure go through the body, which can happen in a variety of ways and not just in sexual contact with another person. So again, bioenergetically, we say that we come into this world, most of us come in healthy, alive, fully alive, connected beings. And then things happen to us along the way that cause us to deaden that aliveness and cause us to shut down our sexuality and to not have the full capacity of our pleasure and our blossoming. And what we're looking at is both physical factors and psychological factors. So for example, if a child is in their, it's around 5, 6, 7 years old that a child comes into their sexuality more fully. And if the parent says to them, oh, you were masturbating and that's bad, the child doesn't say, my parents are messed up here. They don't understand that masturbating is about pleasure and about me having my good feelings. I'm going to tell them they're wrong because a child can't say that. They're dependent on their parents, both for approval and love and acceptance, as well as for their physical needs. So instead, what the child learns to do is to close off from the feelings in their body. And even when I talk about that we see sexuality as an energy movement in the body, if you have no experience of that in your body, that might sound like a weird thing, like, what is it you're talking about? I don't know what you mean there. But through bioenergetics, through getting more in touch with your body, and I will talk about, as the webinar goes on, I'll talk about some of the ways that we work with people to help them feel their body more. You can actually feel this energy going through your body. And it is, even though we have a variety of feelings going on, a variety of responses to our environment that aren't always pleasurable or good, but being connected with that energy in and of itself is pleasurable. It feels good. It feels alive. So we get childhood messages, and also sometimes those traumas are direct physical violations or direct sexual violations, which certainly cause a person to cut off from their sexuality and to see the feelings in their bodies as bad or harmful or painful. But they don't necessarily identify, oh, I was sexually abused and I cut off from my feelings, therefore I don't feel good. They identify, I don't feel good. And general traumas also in terms of our emotional expression, things like messages like good girls don't get angry, boys don't cry. The way a child responds to that is by shutting down their feelings, by shutting down their expression, and that causes chronic muscle tensions, which then stay in the body, and then the person can't cry, can't get angry, and they don't feel good. They don't have that energy going through. So as I'm talking in this presentation also, what I'm going to be talking about is sexuality of a person, of an organism, versus how it is expressed with another person or however that might be expressed, but the sexuality within a person. And sexuality includes having the energy, the desire, and the interest for sex. So in order for a person to have their sexuality, they need to have worked through some of those past traumas and worked through the tensions in their body and released some of their guilt and shame and so on, so that sex is viewed as a good thing and they can have pleasure from it rather than it be viewed as a bad thing. Okay, Linda. Next slide. You there, Linda? Oh, there we go. Okay. So here are some examples of different flowers. And again, as I said, different flowers have different requirements in order to come into their blossom. And on the bottom corner there, you will see a picture of my cottage, which is my office. And that's where I am right now. And I have the good fortune to have this beautiful little cottage surrounded by flowers and gardens in a peaceful setting where people can come and have their experience here and do what they need to do to heal themselves. So another thing about sexuality that I want to say is that it underlies common issues that people come into therapy for, such as depression, which includes a lack of interest in pleasure and decreased energy, anxiety, which is muscle tension, worrying, generally it's up in the head, post-traumatic stress disorder, which includes a startle response and oftentimes not safe in the world, and also addictions, which generally are related to a person shutting off their feelings. So most people, in my experience, don't come into our offices saying, I have a problem with my sexuality. They say, I feel depressed, or I feel anxious, or I drink too much. But what we're looking at bioenergetically is that underneath that is chronic muscle tension and the person not having access to their aliveness, which includes their sexuality, includes that feeling that good energy in their body. Okay, next slide. So this slide is a quote from Alexander Lowen, who started bioenergetic analysis. And I'll give you a moment to read that. And he is talking in this is kind of an overview, especially for people that are new to bioenergetics, about what bioenergetics really is about underneath. And I know that some of my bioenergetic colleagues are out there, and this is probably quite familiar to them, so I'm giving a shout out to them. Thank you for your support. But for people who are new to bioenergetics, this will give you a little bit of a sense, a little bit of a feeling of Alexander Lowen's perspective about the work and about that quality of what we're looking for, vibration, being fully alive, and tolerating excitement in our life and excitement in sex, as well as melting. And I have a little treat for you at the end of this talk about just that. So if you hang on to the end of the talk, you're going to get the treat. That is an example of that excitement and the melting. But you have to hang on to the end of the talk. Okay, I think everybody's probably had a chance to read that one, so let's go on to the next slide. This is a picture of Alexander Lowen, who started bioenergetic therapy. He was a wonderful man. I had the opportunity to be at a couple of workshops with him and to do a couple of sessions with him at his house in Connecticut. So Wilhelm Reich, who is the father of all modern body-oriented psychotherapy, it's actually the grandfather of them, we could say. Reich was a contemporary of Freud, and Reich believed that Freud missed the importance of the body in his psychoanalytic work. So Reich brought that in, and Reich wrote a book in the late 1920s called Function of the Orgasm. And in that book, he talked about his observations that his clients who came in with neurotic issues, which were all of his clients, did not have satisfactory sexual lives. And that, so he was looking into what is the purpose of the orgasm on a biological perspective. And he realized that the orgasm, or he theorized, I guess is a better way to say it, that the orgasm releases excess energy from the body. So if a person's not able to have orgasms, that excess energy is going into neurotic process instead. Alexander Lowen was a student and a client of Reich's, and Lowen agreed with Reich's work, but he felt that Reich's work was not strong enough. Reich still had people laying down on a couch, basically, as they did in psychoanalysis, to work with them. And Lowen got people up on their feet. He also worked with a man named John Periakos. They later split, but together they developed exercises to help people release the tensions in their body in a more strong way than just laying on the couch. And I'll talk about some of those exercises in a little bit. Then Phil Helfer wrote a book called Sex and Self-Respect, and that was published in 1998. And Phil is a wonderful bioenergetic therapist. He was living in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area and started the Massachusetts Society for Bioenergetic Analysis. And in the book Sex and Self-Respect, he brings in the notion of self-respect as an important part of having and enjoying our sexuality. And then Mickey Frank and others were at a bioenergetic conference in Miami in 1992 where the topic was on sexuality. And Mickey Frank wrote an article that's in the International Institute for Bioenergetic Analysis Clinical Journal that was the topic of her talk at that conference in 1992, where she said that really orgasm reflex should not be the focus of our work, but having people enjoy their sexuality and having an experience of their sexuality. So it was a shift of the focus from where Reich really was focused on that the goal was having people have the capacity for orgasm reflex. And Alexander Lowen also wrote an article in that same journal, which was from his talk at that conference, where he said that self-expression is the goal of bioenergetic therapy, not orgasm reflex. So it was a bit of a change in how we look at sexuality in bioenergetic analysis. Okay, Linda, next slide. But nonetheless, through all of this, sexuality has been and remains a central theme in bioenergetics because it's central to what's happening in the person, in the body of a person, and what's that body's capacity to build charge, to let go of control, to experience the pleasure of release. In this slide, give you the picture of the book that Alexander Lowen, one of the many books Alexander Lowen wrote, called The Way to Vibrant Health, where he talks about some of the exercises, and that's him with his wife there demonstrating some of the bioenergetic exercises. And in the bottom corner, that's a picture of Phil Helfer. And I also wanted to add in a shout out to Alice Lattice, who wrote a book in 1982 called The G-Spot and Other Discoveries About Human Sexuality. And Alice Lattice is a certified bioenergetic therapist, and she actually was on the original board of the International Institute of Bioenergetic Analysis in 1956. And when I wrote the article, which some of you may have read in the Somatic Therapy Today magazine, I left this out unintentionally, and I got an email a couple of weeks ago from Alice saying she'll be at the USABP conference this summer and that she would love to meet me. And she reminded me about this book, which I have sitting on my shelf, but I had left it out at that point. So I'm delighted that she reminded me about it. And she also reminded me that at the back of this book there are the results of a survey that she did in 1977, I believe, where she talked with bioenergetic therapists about their experience in bioenergetics, and she did a research project about whether the bioenergetic therapy had helped them increase their sexuality, their assertiveness, and also regarding some of their perspectives about sexuality and about the topic and whether they agreed with Alexander Lowen's ideas or not. So it's quite an interesting piece that I would recommend as well. Next slide, Linda. So there's another piece that I recommend that's called Modern Bioenergetic Therapy. And this is a monograph written by people from the New York Society for Bioenergetic Analysis, and you can find it on their website. And it doesn't talk so much specifically about the issue of sexuality, but they do address some of the ways that bioenergetic theory and viewpoints have changed. And the basis of bioenergetics is still pretty much the same as when Lowen started it, but some of the ways that we practice have changed significantly. And I wanted to say, too, that it's interesting to me to find myself in this place of talking about sexuality as a bioenergetic therapist, because for me, I'm not a big researcher or a big reader, but I have a lot of experience from working with people in my office day in and day out, and really the process of what it's like to work with the average person who comes in looking for help with any of those issues that I talked about, and how do I help them to expand their sexuality. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But I recommend this monograph from the New York Society. Okay, sexuality, what we're talking about is the balancing of two energies. And in this image you will see is a beautiful flower and a bee. And that's kind of the way that life reproduces itself, is beauty in the flower and then the bee that comes along and pollinates. And those are two very different energies. And even as we look at that picture, we might have a different feeling responding to the beauty and the softness of the flower and the bee, which we identify as potentially dangerous to us. So these two energies, again, are within a person. And sometimes we could think of them as male and female, but really they're, and in reproduction, it can be in human reproduction, male and female. But they are within a person also. And they're the energies of active and receptive. the ability to build charge, and the ability to surrender to feeling, strength, and softness. And the more a person can balance these two energies, the more a person can enjoy both aspects of their sexuality. So a person that can be very soft and maybe even passive, but has no capacity to build charge or to be active, is not going to have as much ability to have pleasure with their sexuality. So what I'm looking at when a person comes into my office is, what is this balance like within them? Is this a person that can build charge but can't surrender to softness? Or is this a person who is very receptive but doesn't have much capacity to be active and go out into the world? And this balancing of energies is going to affect not only their sexuality, but also how they function in the world, because we all need both of these energies within us to function and to interact with the people that are important to us, what we work with, the people we see each day. And we need different energies at different times. And I want to say also that I want to say a little bit about the underlying strength of that energy. One thing we work on in bioenergetics also is aggression. And I hesitate a little bit to use that word because culturally we think of aggression as a bad thing, or aggression being against another person. But bioenergetically, even the receptive part can be strongly receptive, and the soft part can have energy with it. So it has to do with having energy with both sides, whichever is we're working on, and not being too passive, I think is the word I'm looking for. And likewise, we don't want to be too aggressive, too much going out there. So it's a balancing. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit now about how we actually work, or how I work in bioenergetic therapy. And I see it as a spiral of steps. So I'm going to tell you what some of these steps are, and it's going to look like it might be linear, but it's not linear because I work with whatever a person is bringing in to me that day, that moment, and we go from there. So we might go around and back and forth and all these different steps, and there are some that I haven't included in here as well. But this will give you a sense of some of the ways that we work, some of the ways that I work with people as a bioenergetic therapist. And on the side of this slide here, you will see NANZBA stands for North America, New Zealand Institutes for Bioenergetic Analysis. And that figure there is kind of a double spiral, is the emblem for bioenergetics, which Alexander Lowen used and when he developed the International Institute for Bioenergetic Analysis. So it's a perfect way to bring in that emblem and that spiraling of energies. So the first step in that spiral is safety in the relationship. And a person comes in for therapy, something's not going right in their life, they're looking for help with something, they're suffering about something, and they need to feel safe in the relationship with me before anything else happens. And for some people, that may happen within 5 minutes. For some people, that might be 8 years of work, and I'm not kidding about that. It might be 8 years because of their childhood trauma before they feel a sense of safety in the relationship. So it takes as long as it takes, but that's the first step, because movement. Safety precedes movement. The next thing that we work with is what we call grounding. And as I told you, Alexander Lowen is known for getting people up off their feet, off the bed, and onto their feet. And this is an example of people doing a standard bioenergetic grounding exercise at a workshop. And there's a quote there from Alexander Lowen about the importance of the grounding exercise and how it is a fundamental exercise in bioenergetics. So grounding has a couple of purposes to it. One is it gets us down in our feet and legs and connected to the earth. And as we're rooted in the earth, we can be more rooted in our whole body and feel more in contact with our body. Some people have issues with sleeping or with racing thoughts. That's a classic issue that people come into therapy for, or as they're in therapy are talking about. And this also helps us to let go of our head, so to not be so much wrapped up in those racing thoughts and our minds going, but to let go of our head. It's an antidote to worry, to anxiety, to fantasy, and even to depression. And I use this exercise, I would say, 8 out of 10 sessions with my clients. And again, the other thing that it does is it helps us to release tension in our legs. So when people are bent over like that, I tell them to gently bend and straighten their legs. And you could do this exercise now if you want, or you could do it another time. It's easy to do and safe. And as we bend and straighten our legs, two things can happen. One is we feel the contact with the ground, and we also release the tensions in the back of our legs, and energy goes through because we're in a stress position, and as we release tensions, a muscle that's not tight will vibrate. So we can start to feel some of that vibration that we were talking about earlier, and it feels good. And then that vibration can go up through our legs and into our body and out through our head and down into our arms. And we start to feel our aliveness. So there are some different ways that we do the grounding exercise also. And this next slide shows another way of doing it, laying on our back, putting our feet up into the air, and again bending and straightening our knees and pressing up into our feet. So we're releasing the tension in our legs, pushing up into the air, feeling the connection through our back onto the ground. And we do, in a bioenergetic exercise class, we'll also often do a work with like a golf ball underneath our feet to release the tensions in our feet more. The other thing that the grounding exercise does is, in terms of feeling more connected with our body, sometimes somebody will talk to me about issues of self-esteem, and I'll say to them, well, the trees out there don't question whether they're good enough or not. They put their roots down and they send their roots out, and they reach their arms up for the sky, and they soak in the sun, and they drink in from the nourishment from the earth. So the more connected we are with the place and with the ground, with the earth, the more we can feel our inherent goodness. The next exercise that we work with is boundaries. We need boundaries around a variety of issues. And those include physical boundaries. Sometimes we don't want somebody too close to us. And they also include mental boundaries and psychic boundaries. Sometimes somebody's thoughts or worrying about somebody starts to invade our mind or our psyche. And also people's judgments and opinions of us. We have judgments and opinions of each other all the time. It's part of our human nature and our being socialized. But sometimes we need to make a boundary around somebody else's judgments of us. And this exercise, interestingly, I have more people tell me this exercise has been useful for them than almost any other exercise that I do with people. And for people who are not familiar with it, again, I have them bend and straighten their knees so they feel their contact with the ground and that solidness beneath them. And then press out into the heel of their hands and feel their ability to make the boundary around them. And they can make that boundary out as far as their arms go. And sometimes we want to make the boundary closer to us. Again, when people have had violations as children, they generally have not been taught that they have a right to have a boundary. And if we can't keep people out and make our boundary, then it's harder to let people in. So this is important in terms of being able to assert our right to have people in the world and as far away from us as we want. It includes being able to protect ourselves from if somebody were to come up to me and want to hurt me in the environment, I might be able to make a boundary with them. Now, I may not be able to do that effectively, but I might. So it gives me a capacity to do that. And our boundaries can't be too rigid. Some people have very rigid boundaries, so they keep everybody very far away from them. Or they can be too soft. Some people have people in their lives in ways that they don't want them. And I work a lot with people about practicing making their boundary and affirming that they have a right to their boundary, because that's the other thing, is they've learned as children that they don't have a right to their boundary. So I affirm that they have a right to their boundary, and sometimes I even encourage them to use some words along with that, which often feels strange to people initially, but as they get used to it, it helps link the mind with the body. So the mind saying, keep away from me, or I have a right to my boundary, or this is my space. And as I say that, along with doing it, they get a feeling for that. Now, the other part about boundaries is being able to reach out for what we need and want to our environment. So once we know we can keep people out, we can also reach. For some people, this is extremely hard, and for some people, this is harder than keeping people out. For some people, this is easier than keeping people out. So it's, again, it is titrated to the person and to what they need moment to moment, and it's different for everybody. So not only can we reach out to what we need and want to other people, we can reach out to the heavens, and we can even share some delicious contact with a friend on the beach and a lovely hug. And sometimes I'll have people reach with one hand and make their boundary with the other hand. So there are lots of ways of working with this exercise, but actually practicing it and doing it can be very strong for people. Another thing we work with in bioenergetic therapy is emotional expression. And This includes having access to a full range of emotions. We all have them, and we, in this society, have labeled some of our emotions, especially anger, especially for women, or tears, especially for men, as bad or negative. But it doesn't mean we don't have those emotions. We just have then learned to push them down and pretend we don't have them, or to hide from them, or to block them, again, with our bodies, our chronic muscle tension. And that inhibits our ability to have ourselves, to feel what we're feeling, to express it in appropriate ways. If I can't have anger at all, or view anger as bad, then I can't tell somebody strongly that they're stepping on my toe and they're hurting me. So there's a time for all of our emotions, and it's having access to all of our emotions is part of being fully alive. In my office, and I think most bioenergetic therapists in their office I have a tennis racket, which I show you here, and big pillows and mattresses. And part of what we're working with on this is people expressing anger from the past and getting it out here in a safe and appropriate way that doesn't hurt them, it doesn't hurt anybody else. I had somebody ask me last week, okay, we were working with anger from when she was a young child and she was not able to express the anger towards her mother. And she said, now, how long am I going to have to do this for? I said, well, the purpose isn't just to get it out of your system. The purpose is to prime the pump in you so that you have access to your anger when you need it. And she said, oh, okay, that's a different thing. But in some of that priming the pump, we might have to get out a lot of anger, and that's why we want to do it in a safe way that doesn't hurt anybody. And our anger informs us that sometimes if somebody is hurting us, somebody from the past that has hurt us before, we may need our anger to protect ourselves, and it's important. Likewise, sadness and grief. And in this next slide is a traditional bioenergetic stool, which Alexander Lowen developed. And we have people go backwards over the stool to open up their breathing, and it opens tensions in the back. Generally, we put them at about the breastbone, going backwards. And it opens the softer emotions, sadness, grief, loss, heartache, and we can let those emotions go freely through us so that we don't have to spend energy keeping them trapped inside of us. Emotions are meant to move, to go through. Another thing we work with is developing self-respect and self-acceptance. So this includes releasing shame and guilt from the past, both in general and regarding one's sexuality. And I have exercises that I use. I'm sure other bioenergetic therapists have exercises that they've developed to help clear those emotions out. My theory about shame, and this is a whole other workshop, is that a lot of times when a child has been abused by somebody, the abuser puts their shame onto the child. So rather than feeling their shame, which they should feel because they're doing something wrong, they give it to the child and say, here, you carry my shame. And again, the child can't say, no, I'm not going to hold that. So the child walks around feeling shamed even though they didn't do anything wrong. And guilt is a similar thing, that people can use that as a way of controlling people that are dependent on them. So I help people, again, do some things about releasing that shame and guilt so that they don't carry that. Also, negative self-talk. I'm sure anybody who, well, everybody has dealt at some point in their time in their life with negative self-talk. And again, this is a big thing underlying depression. And it takes some time to tease those messages out of a person. I'm no good, I'm a loser, getting angry at oneself for making mistakes, those kinds of things. So work with clearing that out of a person so that they don't have to keep holding on to those negative messages about themselves. And we work out sexual traumas, so violations, negative messages. Sometimes a person who has a history of sexual abuse, they need to talk about it. They need to feel safe to tell the stories. And
Lori, you just cut out. You just cut out. You might want to repeat what you just said.
Those stories come up in their own timing. They're often triggered by something that's happened to the person. And it's important for them to be able to talk about it, to share the memory.
Lori?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me now?
You're going in and out real bad. I don't think they could hear the last probably 2 or 3 minutes of that.
Okay, so is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so for people that have had sexual violations, sexual traumas, they need a place to work those out. And oftentimes something in the environment will trigger a memory, and people need to talk about it and to feel safe to have their emotions about it and to let that history go through them. Okay. So then we come to working with sexuality directly. And my favorite tool for this is the ball. And the reason that I use the ball rather than the stool is a couple of things. One is it's familiar to people. So people coming into my office see an exercise ball and they say, oh, I know what that is. They can easily get it. And it's flexible. And they can stay over it longer than they can over the stool. So the ball I use a lot in my sessions with people. And it also, again, opens up the whole front of the body. So the breathing from the mouth all the way to the genitals can open up over the ball. And we can gently shift into working with sexual issues. We work with releasing chronic muscle tensions, especially in the jaw, the neck, and the pelvis. And letting go, I was just working with somebody today about learning to let go of her head well backwards over the ball because she tends to have a lot of tension there. And that tension then is she's going to want to keep control. The head wants to keep control. So it takes a while for people to get used to this, to letting their heads go, but it's an important part of being able to let that energy of orgasm go through the body because it's out of our conscious control. It's not in the control of the head. So tolerating that being out of control with the head. I also work with people on balancing their hips. This is something that if you come to my workshop this summer in Providence, I'll bring my ball and I'll work with some people to show you a little bit about how I work with this. I have people bounce their pelvis, bounce their hips on the ball and see what comes up from that. And again, sometimes the fear will come up, the fear of that feeling, shame, guilt, and we work that through, let that go through so that they can have more of the good feeling that's there in their pelvis. It is good for building strength in the body and capacity for charge. And then again, because the ball is soft and flexible, it helps with inviting softness and the surrender to feeling, the letting go. And for myself, that's me. I use the ball as an exercise, you know, not every single night, but I use it regularly for myself, like 10 or 15 minutes over the ball. And that's me again, over the ball. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is the trauma releasing exercises. And on the right side of the screen there, you'll see me doing an example of those exercises. This was developed by David Bercelli, who is a bioenergetic therapist. And he went to some countries where he didn't speak the language. This was, I'm not sure, it was a while ago, maybe 15 or 20 years ago that he developed this. And people had a lot of acute trauma, and they wanted help in how to release the trauma from their bodies, and he didn't speak the language, so he said, well, we'll have to figure out some exercises. So he developed a set of exercises that have to do with releasing tensions in the legs. And then these two that you see there on the slides about putting the bottoms of your feet together. I'm going to give you the website where you can go to learn more about this soon. And what he observed is that when a person has been traumatized with, especially in acute trauma, the psoas muscle, which goes through the groin, connecting the front of the body to the back of the body, gets tense because in acute trauma, it wants to pull in the front of the body to protect the vital organs. And so to undo the trauma, we need to release that muscle. And we need to restore the vibration in the body. So as the muscle releases and it's in a stress position, it shakes. We know from animals in the wild that if a lion is chasing a deer or a gazelle, and the gazelle or the deer escapes the chase, the lion goes off somehow, and it gets to a safe place, that it will shake. And that shaking is the way the body releases the excess energy that was there from the adrenaline, and then it can relax, having discharged that extra energy, and go on with its thing. So in terms of releasing trauma from our bodies, we need to activate that shaking mechanism because it releases tension from the body, releases the energy that was there from the adrenaline. I'll talk a little bit more about trauma soon, and that's a whole other topic as well, but I'm going to give you a quick bioenergetic perspective in a couple minutes. Okay, so sexuality and spirituality connection. Because the conference is sexuality and spirituality, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on this. Sexuality works with the lower part of our body. It's connection with the ground below and with our animalistic nature, and again sort of that aggressive, I want it, I desire, I'm going to go for it, that charge. And spirituality is the upper part of our body, with our heart, with our expansion beyond to the heavens. We need both in order to have balance. So we've seen what happens with spirituality supposedly without sexuality. I don't think I need to say a whole lot more about that. Sexuality is bad in weird ways because that's something that can lead to things like pornography and just some of the negative things that happen with sexuality when it's not connected. So both are important, and we work with both bioenergetically. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bioenergetic training program, which is the full training for certification, generally lasts 4 years, about 5 long weekends a year. And in that time, we discuss character structure, which is the foundation of bioenergetics, and again is rooted in Wilhelm Reich's theories, which Alexander Lowen then expanded on, and some current people have added some to the body of that knowledge. The basis of it is that from a bioenergetic viewpoint, we see that a human being develops in response to their environment. So we can see in a person's body in the present some things about what happened in their early nurturing. Were they wanted in the world? Were they given proper attention to their hunger and their needs as a young child, young infant? Were they allowed to protest and be independent? Were they allowed to have their sexual energy for themselves? And were they allowed to have their heart and their genitals connected, their sexuality and their heart connected? So in the Bioenergetic program, we focus a lot on that issue of character structure because we view this as an important way of understanding a person and what issues are presenting in their life in the present and how to help them. We also work with teaching bioenergetic techniques and transference and countertransference issues and trauma treatment. So a quick overview about trauma treatment from my perspective and from a bioenergetic perspective. There are different types of trauma, and different types of trauma require a different approach. So one of the things we identify is developmental trauma, which has to do basically with character structure, which we see in the body, and we also see it in a person's what's happening in their life, the way they interact with their world, what's working for them, and the areas that are not working that might be difficult for them. Then there's chronic relational trauma. And the other reason that I think that that issue of why people don't just shake off the trauma and go on with their lives and get better is it goes back to what I was talking about in terms of safety, that if a person has chronic relational trauma, which means, for example, I have a client who her parents were always angry at her, and whatever she did, it wasn't right, it wasn't good enough, she didn't clean the house well enough, she didn't do this well enough, she didn't do that well enough, her schoolwork wasn't good enough, and not only was it not good enough, but they were always angry. So if I had $1 for every time she asked me, "Are you angry at me?" I would be a wealthy woman. So she's traumatized around people being angry at her. And she has not recovered, she's not out of the trauma yet. She doesn't know, she's just learning after some years that relationships can be different than that she can have a different experience, and that she can feel safe in a relationship. So the bottom line of chronic relational trauma is feeling safe to be myself, feeling safe to have my feelings, my needs, my wants, make my boundaries. And sometimes with a person like this, for example, I went with one of my clients last week to go to court to extend a restraining order against somebody that was hurtful to her that she's afraid of in her life. And for her, she was not allowed to protest in her childhood. So she was hurt a lot by her parents, but she was not allowed to say, "No, I don't want you to do that," of course. And she also was not allowed to feel, for that matter. She was not allowed to cry or get or any of those things. So when she came back from court, she was shaking like a leaf. And again, that shaking, the court replayed her traumatic childhood experience. She was going against something that she had learned as a child. She had learned you're not allowed to protest. And in going to court, she was protesting this person hurting her, and very scared, very, very scared. So after that, the judge granted her the restraining order. It was relatively easy, no big problem. She felt safe. She felt safer. She was shaking. And the body needs to shake off that excess adrenaline that was triggered from that early trauma. So chronic relational trauma we deal with in the relationship and in the person feeling safe in the relationship and the expectations of the relationship being clear, as in therapy. Acute traumas require a different approach, and sometimes or often actually a person will have acute trauma on top of developmental trauma and on top of chronic relational trauma, and that requires a different approach. So we cover that in the training program. There's a big emphasis in bioenergetic training on self-understanding and working through our own issues, because the work with people is so different, again, moment to moment and session to session. Something different is required of us. And the best way for us to be there is first to really be solid in ourselves, to know our own issues, to know where we get triggered, to know our own past, our own history, and to work that through, and to be more in our own aliveness so we can respond to our clients with that. Here is a wonderful quote from Ann Coleman in Michigan about her experience in the training program. Coming up, the next slide, there it is. I'm going to give you a moment to read that because it really speaks to the value of the bioenergetic training program and the value that we place on working on our own issues and the depth of experience that happens in that 4-year, that extended training program. We're almost to the treat, by the way, so hang in there. Okay, people have had a time to look at that. So we have some upcoming bioenergetic events that I wanted to tell you about. The first one is anybody living in the Massachusetts area. We're thrilled to have Len Carlino, who is a fabulous bioenergetic therapist and an faculty member for the International Institute for Bioenergetic Analysis, is doing a talk on using strong and regressive bioenergetic techniques without re-traumatizing the client. So I know that the issue about re-traumatizing people is a big concern out there, and in our bioenergetic work, we also are conversely concerned about wanting people to have as much aliveness and vitality as they can have in their lives. So we don't want to hold back on what we have to offer people. We want to use the tools that we have to really support them to grow and have as much aliveness and joy and pleasure as they can have in their lives. And we're very excited in Massachusetts. We have a fall conference. This will be, I think, our 4th annual fall conference coming up October 20th, 23rd. As always, you just see the slide here for it. Healing from the Inside Out, Relationship, Body, and Mind. Featuring, there it is, featuring Bob and Virginia Hilton from California. We are thrilled to have them come. They're bioenergetic masters who have been doing this work for many, many years and have a lot to teach us. They're going to be keynote speakers at the conference, and they will be running a group that will be for people who have graduated from the bioenergetic training program or are certified bioenergetic therapists. And there will also be groups for people who are interested in learning more about bioenergetic therapy and people that are non-professionals and interested in doing some deep work, deep experiential work in the context of a group setting. And it's a beautiful place. It's a great way to meet bioenergetic colleagues, other people that are on this path. And I encourage you to go to our website if you'd like more information about that. So, and coming up on the next page are some links for you. This is also in the handout. So the International Institute for Bioenergetic Analysis, and they will have their, we have a conference every 2 years, and the next conference will be in Toronto, coming up in May of 2017, I believe. So that's a great opportunity to learn more about the International Institute. There's the North American New Zealand Institutes, and we're just about to redo the website for that. So if you check back maybe in about a month, we're going to have a fancy new website there. The Massachusetts Society for Bioenergetic Analysis is www.massbioenergetics.org, where you can go to learn about our conference in the fall, other events going on. The Florida Society for Bioenergetic Analysis, and they have some great events going on there. There's a retreat for working women coming up in May that I would highly recommend. And then there is the website for trauma releasing exercises if you'd like to learn more about that. So here comes the treat. This is our dog Loki, who has a very healthy sense of sexuality. And this is who we call his girlfriend. This is stuffed St. Bernard. And Loki loves just having at it with that girlfriend. So that is Loki and his good time. We learn a lot from him about, he's not shy about just coming in and having at it, having a good time, rocking and rolling with his pelvis. And then when he's done, he and his girlfriend get to enjoy the pleasure of release, the relaxation that comes after that. So here I am in my office saying goodbye to you, and as I said at the end of the article that I wrote, as bioenergetic therapists, working with sexuality in therapy can be challenging, but we have the balls for it. And as you can see there are different sizes of balls that we work with for different situations. The golf balls for working with people's feet, and other balls for working out tensions in their back, and the ball that I have people go over. Okay, and there you go. We'll see you in Providence.
Okay, let's see how many questions we have. We have several. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. How would you suggest beginning to integrate a bioenergetic approach into a talk-style therapy with couples?
Is this coming from somebody who is a bioenergetic therapist, do we know, or?
That I don't know.
Okay. So
William, do you want to type in there, are you a bioenergetic therapist? But go ahead and start answering, I'll let you know.
Okay. You can do work with boundaries with couples. I have an exercise that I like to use with couples where I'll ask them to talk about to find a place in the room that represents where they are in relation to the other person. And so it means generally they'll get up and move around the room as a result. And it's fascinating what comes out of that. And then I'll have them talk, obviously, from that perspective. But it shifts things up. It moves things from having them just sit in the chairs and talk to each other. And sometimes they'll get insights about what's happening for the other person that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. There are some people that are very smart about working with couples in a bioenergetic approach. That's not my specialty, but and I'm not sure where to go to find those resources. Again, grounding together, working with boundaries, you could have them put their hands on each other's hands in that boundary exercise and play around with experiencing the boundary with each other. You can also have them go back to back and explore leaning on each other and see what that brings up for each of them.
Okay, and William also had another question right below it that said bioenergetic therapy has many great techniques doing to offer clients. What emphasis does the training place on the therapeutic relationships being with?
On the therapeutic relationships with
I think it was the techniques is the doing to, and what emphasis does the training place on the therapeutic relationship being with?
Okay, all right. We place a lot of emphasis on the being with, again, because the being with starts with being with ourselves. And actually, I taught about techniques recently in a training group, and the whole way we approach techniques has changed a lot over the years. And we use techniques, our techniques are a way of being with, I would say, not a way of not being with. So it all starts with being with ourselves, and then it starts with being with the client and finding out where they are. I should say this as well, that as a bioenergetic therapist, my office, the chairs in my office look like a regular therapist office. The client comes in, and 95 out of 100 sessions, the client sits on the chair across from me, and we start by talking about what's going on for them. So right from the get-go, it's about being with them and finding out where they are. And then I use techniques as a way of saying, okay, this is where the person is. What's the next step for them? What's the next, where are they stuck? Where do they need to go? Where's the opportunity for growth? And that's where the techniques come in. They have everything to do with being with ourselves and being with the other person. And actually, that's probably some of the ways that, if you'll read that New York Society monograph about modern bioenergetics, it's probably perhaps the biggest way that bioenergetics really has changed. I don't think anybody who was Alexander Lowen's client could say he wasn't with you. He was absolutely with his clients and present there with you. But we have changed more in terms of really valuing the relationship and hanging out with the person wherever they are and gently moving them. The techniques become a way to introduce something different, and then we're with them in that. So the being with is very important in our work.
William says, thank you very much, Lori. That was beautiful. He is an experienced couple therapist and in the beginning training of bioenergetics. And let's see. Another question that came through. What is the suggestion you give when taking the understanding of sexual flow in the office to the client's first bedroom experience with their new love?
What is the suggestion I give about that? Was that what the question was?
What is the suggestion you give when taking the understanding of sexual flow in the office to the client's first bedroom experience with their new love?
Well, I have to say, first of all, I would be so thrilled if a client actually asked me that question. I don't think I've ever had somebody actually ask that question as a client. In fact, let me use this as a jumping off point. People don't generally come in saying I have sexual issues or I want help with my sexuality. It's underneath the surface. It comes out later. It comes out as part of the process. And I've learned that if they do come in saying I have an issue with my sexuality, to go very slowly, because it means that there's a lot going on there. And to explore the psychological issues more before getting to the physical issues, actually. But let's say somebody did ask me that question, I would say, so here's the thing about sexuality. The first and foremost for all of us is to be with yourself and to be in your own flow, and then to see how that is to share that with another person, and to remember that you have the right to ask for what you want, to reach out, and to make a boundary. If somebody is doing something to you or with you or on you that you don't want, you can make a boundary with that. And if that person cares about your well-being and cares about you having your pleasure and having as good a time as you can have, they will want to respond to that. And if they don't care about that, then you might want to consider whether that's a good person for you to be with or not. So it's about being with ourselves first, and then even when we're with another person, staying with ourselves and with our own feeling and enjoying that with another person, and then we might have something fantastic happening.
That's great. I have one more question, and then I think we'll call it a night. Is Miki Frank a woman? I am wondering her insightful focus change would relate to the ability to achieve orgasm in sex. Can you speak a little bit more about this?
Miki Frank is a woman, and let me read, and actually, you know, let me jump off from that too in terms of Alice Lattice and the work that she did. One of the big pieces of that was bringing the feminine voice, bringing women's voice into the topic of sexuality, because before that it had been Reich and Lowen, and they have a bit of a different perspective as men. So Miki also, as a woman, brought in the feminine voice. And I have the journal right here. Let me see if there's anything I could read to you. Okay, here's from the beginning of this talk. She says, to begin with, I'd like to make it perfectly clear that it was never my intention to be standing in front of you today talking about orgastic potency. It's all Alexander Lowen's fault. One night we were at an executive committee meeting brainstorming about the next conference, which was to have sexuality as its theme. Someone mentioned that orgastic potency might be a good topic for one of the talks. Lowen turned to me and said, "Why don't you talk about that?" "I can't," I said. "Why not?" "Because," I answered, "I don't think of orgastic potency in a totally positive light." Lowen rose to his feet. "Then have the courage to get up and say so in public." I got to my feet and said, "All right, I will," and here I am. So in this talk, she talks about that orgastic potency as a goal is not something we should be aiming for. She says it does exist, it's real, but the fiction lies in the belief that it can be a permanent condition, a permanent state of being, that one can achieve orgastic potency and hold on to it for all time. That is to deny the ebb and flow of things. In truth, such potency is elusive as love. Depending on the person, he or she may experience what we call falling in love many times. Okay, but then she ends this saying, she talks about a tree, and she ends this saying, and if orgastic potency should overtake us in the process, all I can say is hallelujah. So it's a wonderful article that she wrote, and to hear her. Oh, okay, here we go. Summing up, I don't believe we can ever fully and permanently become orgastically potent any more than we can become fully and permanently healthy, given all the damage done to each and every one of us and the conditions of the society we live in. To my mind, it is some of our patients, and even some of us sitting in this room, believe that such a permanent state is possible. It causes one to turn against oneself, condemn oneself, because once again we're less perfect. So that's really the sum of her viewpoint, is that it's not a goal, and that's part of the ways that really the views on that have changed. And it's not something that either you're there or you're not, and because it can be a way to judge myself, oh, I'm good enough or I'm not good enough. But there are pointers in the body about going for more of that and having more of that, and we might have some orgastic potency and we might have a good time with it. So hallelujah.
She replied back to you in the middle of that. She said, is that because many women don't orgasm the way men do?
I don't think necessarily that's what she's talking about. I think Mickey was talking about it as and actually we could really question whether men orgasm the way that we're talking about here also, because again, if you're talking just about ejaculation, that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We are talking about the ability to surrender to a wave that goes through the body with orgasm. So it's not just ejaculation, it's a wave, and what happens in that is the pelvis has movement that is out of our conscious control. It lets go and moves involuntarily, and there's a wave of breath that goes through the body. And orgasm, I will tell you from personal experience, is not necessarily related to having any partner. It can we can have it in our body in an exercise class or in the swimming pool without anybody around us knowing. It's a giving into that wave of energy of life going through the body. And breath. It involves breath, and it involves letting go with our head and our jaw, opening our jaw, and it's a wonderful feeling.
Fabulous. Oh, lots of yeses and a lot of thank you. This was a great presentation, very thorough. Thank you for the brilliant presentation. Nice job. Kudos. You did good. Got lots of, so awesome. Thank you, thank you. Lots of people have responded saying.
All right, so as we end, I have a little thing to listen to.
Hello?
Saying what?
There you go. Now you're back. You went away for a minute.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, I have a little, this is, okay. Yeah, you said at the end something. You there?
Yeah, you're going in and out again.
Linda?
I'm here.
Okay.
But you're going in and out.
Okay, I have a little piece for people to listen. Okay. So as we end, here's a little piece. Is there anything else?
No, you're good. Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to play this. This is called Sex, Drums, and Rock and Roll. So as we finish up, just let your body move and let yourself feel some of that vitality. And your family might say, what the heck is going on with you? But wherever you are, just enjoy the music and enjoy that going through your body and enjoy your vitality. Okay, so on that note, I hope to see some of you in Providence, and we'll have fun.
All right. Thank you, Lori, so much for being with us tonight. And thank you, everybody that showed up. Be sure to go check out the conference site and Lori's workshop, and we'll see you there. Everyone have a great night.
Thanks.